Hi, I'm Freddie Hebert, the President and CEO of Text Project. Thanks for joining us for this discussion about how words and literature can support hope in classrooms. So throughout history, children and young people have confronted lots of troubling issues in their lives, some private, some in the society. But it seems that living in a digital age has exacerbated the challenges kids can experience. Information is more immediate, it's more available, and there's more of it. And as educators, parents, caregivers, we're all concerned about the impact that the images and stories that our children encounter, how those can affect our students. Today, I'm exploring the hypothesis that literature can put events into a different context, and it can show how human beings have experienced challenging times and have found sources of strength and resilience within themselves. You remember after the Common Core State Standards, there were lots of questions about the role of narrative, of stories, since the pendulum seemed to have swung in the direction of an overabundance of informational text. Now, informational text can also be really informative and supportive in helping us inspire hope in ourselves and in our students. But in particular, narrative serves a very important function in all of this. Now, we live in an age of knowledge. That's what distinguishes this digital global world of ours. I asked ChatGPT to give me a diagram of what the available knowledge in the world looks like. And this is the picture, the graphic that was produced. I think it's just an amazing representation because it's showing a brain and it's showing clusters of all of the continents. It's showing the whole world basically inside of us that we're needing to process and experience a lot. So there's a lot of knowledge, but one of the things to keep in mind is that for generations, for centuries, human beings have kept their knowledge in the form of texts. So if you think of the first texts, which were carved on stone, I think of my grandpa's time when the texts were written in beautiful script. I think of publishing my most recent book, where it looks fairly conventional. And then we've got a whole library of textual information on an iPhone. Now, I do want to note that, yes, text can take different forms. It's not all written in the same way. We can have audio text and so on. But the thing to remember is that it has been a place, texts have been a place where we can keep a record of what we've learned and what we've done as human beings. That actually is what distinguishes us as a species, that we're able to generate texts, and we can hear about the experiences of people from generations of long ago, as well as of the present, and predictions of what the future will be like. Now, a second aspect of this is that, texts are made up of words, and words are the components of knowledge, right? So any construct, you have ideas that are expressed in words. And it turns out that in terms of the words that we experience, and English has a great many words, more than most languages, people have done research that shows that the interaction between two college-educated adults having a cup of tea or coffee is likely to contain fewer rare words than many storybooks for even toddlers. Not always the case, but sometimes. When we're talking in a venue like this one, college-educated folks, they're going to be more hard words. But the point is that when you're expanding your ideas of the world, texts are a critical source for that. You get your basic conversational vocabulary in an oral language, but there are certain constructs and concepts that never come up. Unless you live in a place like Hawaii, you probably aren't going to hear a lot or know a lot about volcanoes. That's something that you experience through texts in the academic process. Okay, so texts are critical in what we know and what we are capable of understanding about our world. I'm talking today about an article that I wrote with Dixie Massey and Margaret Vaughn that was published in Reading Teacher. And at Text Project, we provided a snapshot of this article so that I know that lots of educators and parents don't have access to some of the academic sites where the literature is provided. But if you'd like to have a full copy, not the final version that was printed, but a final copy of the article, it's available at my researchgate.net site. I'll provide this address again at the end. Okay, so I want to give a little bit of background in terms of knowledge in text and what we talked about in this article with Dixie Massey and Margaret Vaughn. What exactly is hope? I mean, sometimes, and I've had conversations now with an extended community about this issue, and lots of people define it very differently. But when people like John Dewey have looked at the issue of hope, hope isn't just something that's like a wish or optimism or an aspirational goal. What is described as being hope is it something that you desire and expect that can happen and be obtained, and that you actually have some agency. There's some proactiveness around attaining that. So there's a goal, a pathway for accomplishing goals, and there's agency. So when I started looking for books on the topic of hope, it seemed like I couldn't find a book that didn't provide a hopeful message. There are stories, so a lot of these are biographical narratives that tell the stories of how people have overcome incredible challenges to accomplish meaningful and important things in their lives and the lives of other people. Here's another example of some texts related to the tenacity, resilience of women and what they've accomplished. And as I said at the beginning, we can look at books related to biology and chemistry and physics and learn about the incredible findings and inventions of human beings. Like the Moonshot book tells the story of how we got to the moon as predicted in a decade by John F. Kennedy. So what I'm suggesting is when I look at particular books that contain important information, I can be hopeful. I can have a sense of agency because of the accomplishments and the things that people have learned. And that's also true about our social environments. The book on the right is one that I really, really adore. It's a beautiful story about Franklin D. Roosevelt as a child and his interactions with an indigenous individual who actually taught him to be a very proficient rower of a canoe, and also taught him a lot about life. So books about hope aren't just about stories or biographies. There are also, although the FDR one is a biography, there are also descriptions of, for example, this, what do you do with a problem? Inventive ways to look at things, which is also the case with the book Home. Today, I want to talk specifically about two books that are oriented to grades 3 to 5. So I want to talk about these books, but the ideas that I'm describing behind them are applicable from the beginning levels, even with preschoolers, all the way through the school grades into high school. So in our article, we presented a framework for understanding the issues of hope. So the ideas, remember that I talked about initially, is setting goals, making plans, taking action, and then reflecting on what the character specifically did. So I first want to look at the fiction book, and I'm going to look at how we identify the themes in these texts, and then also how we can examine particular words, because remember, words instantiate, they represent concepts, the knowledge that we're gaining from text. So this book, When You Trap a Tiger, I think is a pretty complex book. It's said to be for kids in grades 3 to 5. I left it with lots of questions, but it won the Newbery Medal Award, and it seemed to me to be one that does have a hopeful message. It shows a child being active after having had a stance of lethargy and discouragement. So here's what happens in this story. So we were looking at, I'm going to jump back to these ideas. What goals did the characters have? How did they prepare for meeting them? What actions did they take? So let's see what Lily did. And I'm actually looking here mostly at the middle of the book. So she starts out with a problem. Her grandma is ill, and her family has to move to be with grandma. Not too long before this, Lily's dad has passed away, and the family is still suffering from that. Lily is describes herself as feeling invisible. So Halmoni, the grandma, says that the tiger that Lily has seen, and this is imaginary realism. It's a fantasy. We don't know, but Lily has had this image of a tiger standing in the road, and Grandma says that it's because of something she did. So Lily's hope, this is what she hopes for, that she can find the jars where the grandma put the stories, and this will help her grandma get better. So what does Lily do in terms of action? So we've got the problem, we've got the hope, and here are the actions. She goes to the library to learn about trapping tigers. She meets and makes a new friend. She learns stories from the tiger because she eventually encounters them again. And then the outcome is that Lily is able to tell her grandma a story. And grandma dies. So Lily hasn't solved the problem of keeping grandma alive. But what has happened is that the family and the community have come together to honor grandma. And Lily's sister Sam asks her to tell her a story. So no longer are they estranged, and Lily no longer feels invisible. So there's been not necessarily the outcome that you initially thought might be what you needed to have happen, but there's a positive outcome here as a result of Lily's actions. Lily has brought back the storytelling to her family. Now, I want to talk about, because this is where I do a lot of my research, that we can focus on specific words within these texts to help kids expand their ideas related to solving problems, resilience, and just broadening their vocabularies. These are words that I found, and I hope I made this clear, that these are all the unique words. in about 10 chapters of this book. I didn't scan the entire book, but these are all the words in about 10 chapters. And on the web, I found what's pretty typical, some recommended lessons around this book and this section of the book. And what you see are, they're not bad words. There's some interesting words here, stereotype, prognosis, and so on. But there's no there's no central framework. And the thing about words in text, these are all the rare words in the text. You can't teach all of them by any stretch of the imagination. But what we can do is teach kids to think about stories in relation to the characters and their traits, the context of the story, and the traits and ways in which the characters feel emotions and also communicate. So what you're seeing here is that early on, Lily feels invisible. She feels stereotypical, apologetic, distracted, fixated, and she's described as malfunctioning. At the end, she's maneuvered, improvised, and she's confronted what she's been afraid of. So what I'm suggesting is, as we look at literature, we bring words into clusters that help us understand the different events in the story. Stories always have this kind of organization. And rather than just attending to a handful of words that don't really connect to each other, what we're helping students see is that in a story, the characters will experience emotions. The ways in which I communicate make a real big difference. For example, if I grimace rather than smile, that tells you something about how the character or how I'm feeling. So the structure of picking words that expand students' understanding of emotions, of the ways in which we communicate, of our traits, of the context of situations, are ways in which we can support them in this stance of action and agency. Now, for the framework of nonfiction, we ask, what are the issues? What could we do to help, or how was action taken? And we've learned that hope isn't just a feeling, it's taking charge of your own actions. So let me take a look at Funny Bones. I think this is just a really outstanding book that shows the amazing resilience of a young man who was born into poverty. Now, an informational text, even a biography like this, is going to be very different than the structure that I showed you with the stories. So we see that Lupe is born into a poor family. He gets support from his brother. He starts a print shop. He gets into trouble because his cartoons anger politicians. He's highly successful, but a flood destroys his print shop. And then he eventually develops something that becomes really, it contributes to his community. And these are these Calaveras. His way of making illustrations for the Day of the Dead is something that is sustained to this day. So here's somebody who shows us that he kept on trying and he created something that is remembered to this day. Now, what can we say about the vocabulary here? When we're focusing on the vocabulary in an informational text, it takes a really different form than when we're looking at a story. And what I'm suggesting is, if you just pick a couple words, you know, even like 5 to 7 is what we typically do when we look at books, you're not going to capture either the big ideas and help kids retain them, nor are you really going to help them understand the connections between ideas. So the thing about Don Pei, he interacted with businesses, and there's some really great words here in terms of understanding artisans and vendors. He printed various things, including broadsides, which had a historical value. He had certain goals with his illustrations. He expressed opinions, he criticized, he praised, he ridiculed. And, you know, he learned different printing techniques. And in the book, there's just some excellent descriptions of each of these printing techniques. It also describes what a calaveras is, the festive bony figures that we see at the Day of the Dead. So what I'm suggesting here is that studying the story gives you some idea of pathways that people have taken. And then we can focus in on some of the words that help us expand our understanding of the world and the possibilities in it. Now, I want to tell you about some of our resources at Text Project. We have Read Aloud Favorites. This was another one of the books that I was thinking of talking about today. It's a wonderful narrative about a girl who moves from being bored and sullen to being caring and supportive. She eventually becomes a doctor and helps the children in an Indian village that she visited as a child. So we have Read Aloud Favorites. We also have ways in which we can help kids look at vocabulary and stories. So we have something called Everyday Expressions. And one of them that you use a lot is the word guess. And it turns out there are a lot of words that mean the same thing. English as a language that has two linguistic sources, Anglo-Saxon or German, and French also has a great many options for us to express things. And these are the kinds of things we see in stories and in informational text as well. But the point is that often we know the basic word that underlies these, you might call them these quarter words or, you know, academic words. We also have maps that help you understand the core vocabulary. And over time, we do have lots of presentations on our YouTube site about what the core vocabulary is. But there are 2,500 families of words, and a family is like express, expression, or describe, description, or discuss, discussion. That's an example of different families. And we provide a way for students to see the connections among these words, that there are words that represent mental actions, for example. And each of these words in turn has a way to study their morphological families and also the semantic families. We also have word pictures that help you with some of the ideas that you're going to see or read about in text, like amphibians and reptiles. So we have, I think we've got about 400 pictures that represent many of the words within the core vocabulary. Okay, so thanks for joining today. And I hope you visit Text Project. Here's the URL for the article that I talked about. Well, let me reiterate what I've talked about. What I've said today is that every generation has challenges. Our kids today are faced with a unique set of challenges. They see lots of images, they hear lots of things, they read and see a lot of things on social media and in various other contexts. And what I've suggested today is that narratives and informational texts can be a way in which we support our kids in seeing how people, some in stories that are made up, like When You Trap a Tiger, others in books like Funny Bones that describe the experience of a real person, that these can help us develop the agency that keeps us going in life, that keeps us seeing that something is possible, that we can build things, we can create things, relationships, skills, jobs, communities, and so on. And I think that this is a really important thing as we deal with an emphasis today, as well we should have, on the technical aspects of teaching kids to read. And if you go to Text Project, you'll see that this is something I've spent a lot of my career writing and talking about. But I think it's also important for us as teachers to engage kids in rich literature that generates hope. And I hope that you've gotten, I hope that was my intent. I created this so that I could extend this conversation that I've been having in my life and with my friends to a larger group.